Good morning, everyone. This is Eliza K. S. Libuon, the last discussant of Group 3, Module 3, Communicating in the Office. Communicating is to transfer information to another person. Communicating can hold us in many barriers, lack of interest to the speaker, and sometimes we have misinformation. Barriers to effective listening. In this discussion, I will discuss the barriers in effective listening and for us to know what kind of barriers do we have in communication and how to deal with that. Barriers are threat to the success of effective communication. They make communication inaccessible, unintelligible, thereby killing the prospect of its being effective. How often has your mind wandered when someone was telling you something? This usually happens when the topic is discussed does not interest you. Sometimes the conversation may be too long and tedious. Sometimes the topic of discussion may be interesting, but the speaker is unable to grab your attention, or you may unable to comprehend because of lack of knowledge of the topic or the vocabulary or language of the speaker. There must be motivation and interest in a conversation to be able to be listened effectively. However, even if there is motivation and interest, there might be some barriers that affect our ability to listen well. So, in communication, they cannot prevent the barriers that we have, for example, lack of interest in the topic, or maybe you are lack of knowledge of that discussion, even if we already have the strategy to catch up with the person's interest, the barriers are still there. The barriers to effective listening in our subsequent sections. Linguistic and semantic barriers. This is one of the most common barriers to listening. Learners of a language normally face this kind of barrier. So, the meaning of the words, signs, and symbols might be different from one person to another, and the same word might have hundreds of meaning. Next is unfamiliar vocabulary. Words used by the speaker may not be familiar to you. The speaker may use difficult words and jargons. As a result, you cannot comprehend what the speaker says. Unfamiliar vocabulary can lead to barriers because not all people have a lot of vocabulary words. But the more words you encounter, it is helpful to you if you note and search for that word. Elements of connected speech. The speaker is too fast. There are very few pauses and the rhythm that might not be familiar to you. You fail to recognize familiar words because of contractions, reductions, and thinking. For example, the speaker says, I scream, and you hear ice cream. So, speakers do not do limited pauses and talk so fast. So, in this case, of course, you cannot understand what the speaker is saying. In that case, the speaker must do more pauses to avoid communication barriers. Unable to predict, guess, and interpret meaning from the context. A person who pays attention to sound structure would recognize that rapidly spoken I drank it first could mean either I drank it first or I drank it first. You should be able to recognize whether it is I drank it first or I drank it first from the context. Sometimes the speaker implies something but does not overtly express it. That would be all, thank you. Is a polite and indirect way of telling someone you do not need their services anymore. Instead of the more direct, you may leave now. You guess the meaning from the context, though the speaker does not overly express what he or she wants. The listener pays attention to words and structure, but not in the meaning of it. The speaker also uses guesswords for you to know the meaning. Get words but lose ideas. You lose track if you concentrate on each and every word the speaker says, especially if you need to do it for a long period. As a result, you may understand the meaning of almost all the words but do not get the gist. You do not distinguish the important information from the unimportant. It means that you only understand the words and information, but you do not understand what is being said. Sociocultural barriers. The sociocultural barriers also hamper effective listening. Cultural background includes your ethnicity, age, nationality, and gender. Each of these individuality influences the way you use language. Different cultural background. The speaker's accent and pronunciation of words are not familiar to you because of difference in cultures between you and the speaker. So the speaker accent will affect the communication because the pronunciation of words is not the same. So that would be the barrier in communication. Unfamiliar subject. The subject may not be familiar to you because you are not familiar with the particular culture, are unaware of the lifestyle of a particular society. So you must do is to do research and background check to the subject so that you have information. Gather that information as your preference. Psychological barriers. Forming opinions and drawing conclusions before listening. It is not a bad idea to know the purpose of your listening, but you may form opinions about the speaker even before he or she speaks. You may make assumptions about the subject to be spoken about and draw conclusions even before the speaker speaks. This may block your mind, and as a result, you will not be able to listen. Before the speaker speaks, the listener must create conclusions, whether it is drawing or what, for them to conclude the opinion and ideas of the speaker. Lack of interest in the topic. You may not listen if you do not have any interest in the speaker's topic. So the listener could not listen if the topic is not interesting because people have a short period of time for listening and they get bored. So in able to catch the person's interest, you must have an inspirational message for them to listen. Inability to pay attention. Daydreaming and a wandering mind may prevent you from listening. Daydreaming is a part of human life, but this is the most barriers in communication because daydreaming can be barrier for not paying attention to the speaker. Prejudice. You may refuse to listen to something which goes against your ideas and beliefs. You hear only what you want to hear. So these barriers, you only believe in yourself and not to the speaker. You only listen if the speaker believes in your beliefs. Physical barriers. Physical barriers also hinder effective listening. Let us see what these physical barriers are. Physical barriers is the environmental and natural condition that act as a barrier in communication. Noisy surroundings. The environment may be too noisy, which may affect listening. Best example of this is the vehicle sound, people sound. This can affect communication in office. Next is physical distance. You may be too far away from the speaker or too close to the speaker to be able to hear clearly. Distance in communicating is important because if the speaker is too far to the listener, possibility is they cannot understand each other. How to deal with barriers in written communication. Ineffective written communication may overturn everything fair intended in the content of message. It can prevent an application from landing in his or her dream job. One promotion can cancel a deal and may hamper the image of an organization. Barriers in written communication entirely distort the content of the message sent and result in communication breakdown. It is therefore essential to cope with the barrier in written communication in order to ensure that effective communication is established. In order to deal with barrier, you must pay attention to details and understand the target meaning, and also consider your nonverbal expressions and always do the review, reflect, and revise. The necessary ways to deal with such barriers. First is right people. Right people who are adept in spoken and written language should be given top priority at the time of recruitment in any organization. Proper training for enhancing effective communicating skills of the newcomers and also of the existing employees should be ensured regularly. People drafting communication content should be well versed in spoken and written language. So, people must have a well proper training skills in spoken and written language to enhance effective communication. Right language. Simplicity, lucidity, and correctness should be emphasized in all organizational written communication. So, clarity of language must be correct because right language is the thing that can prevent people from understanding each other. Right presentation. Make your presentation or writing almost error free. Avoid stuffing the message with silly errors like lose in place of lose, there in place of there, to in place of to, and etc. Always edit and spell check the content before its finalization. So, always proofread your presentation before you present and check the correct grammar for you to have a convenient presentation. Write content. Focus on what the message really intends to communicate. Avoid dilly-dallying with topic for correspondence. The content needs to be precise, short, and meaningful. The content must be exact and specific to the topic that you have to share, and also it is meaningful to the listener. Right sequence. The written message should be written in sequence, denoting proper meaning and order of matter presented therein. The message written exactly in pattern that guides the message to the listener. Right channel. Considering the content and timing of the message, the communicator should choose the most appropriate channel to transmit the message. If it is confidential or carries any sensitive information, it should be sent through such medium which provides greater security, for instance, encrypted email. So, the communicator should create an exact date and time to transmit the message, and to ensure that the message is secured, the communicator should use digital mails such as emails or what. Right feedback. Inappropriate or wrong feedback defeats the purpose of the message sent. It results in communication breakdown. Hence, the message should be written in a desired manner and sent through appropriate channel so as to ensure early feedback from the recipient. The sender must ensure that the message is transmitted to the right recipient, so that the recipient must give feedback to the sender. Effective communication. Elements of poor communication. Lack of effective communication across and beyond a business organization is termed as poor communication. It affects the free flow of ideas, employee productivity, staff cooperation, innovation, and ultimately upset overall efficiency of human resources of the organization. Poor communication elements are found in all types of communication. We have learned about these barriers in our previous chapters. Besides lack of commitment among the workforce, inexperienced staff, feeling of fear and dissatisfaction, unconscious incompetence among the employees and the managers can also result in poor communication. So, poor communication in an organization can lead us to ultimately upset and overall efficiency of the organization. Reasons for poor communication. The flowchart given below shows the different reasons for poor communication. First is lack of information to carrying out a particular task. It must be having more information to gather in a task, or else this can lead you to a problem in communication and poor leadership in the organization. Leaders must clearly communicate organizational goals so the employees are never left guessing, and to communicate clearly can lead to false assumption. Personal issues of the manager and employees that distract their attention. Personal issues that belong to the office because it can cause distraction to coworkers and have a big impact on an organization or a workplace. Sociocultural diversity is found in the workforce. Unequal opportunity workplace and lack of communication to the employees as managers result for a poor communication. Consequences of poor communication. Inability on the part of the recipient to understand the message leads to confusion and misunderstanding. Unable to understand the message can cause misunderstanding and confusion to the listener. Poor communication affects the concentration of the listener in oral communication that defeat the meaning of the message. It can affect the concentration of the listener and the meaning of the message they don't understand. Poor communication results in ambiguity that distorts the content of the message or spoken words. So, poor communication can cause changes in the content of the message. It leads to incomplete action as the content of the message sent or spoken is not grasped by the recipients. If the message can't be received by the recipient, it must be called incomplete action. Poor communication between the business and customers affects sales and ultimately hampers the growth of the business. Poor communication can affect the sales of the business because how will your business grow if your communication to the customer was poor? Poor communication between the management and the employee can lead to demotivation and affect overall productivity. Employees become unwilling to work with the managers who communicate poorly. Poor communication of the manager to the employees will create a big impact to the organization or in a company because the employees will be motivated to work, and also the employee will feel unwillingly to work because of the poor communication to the managers. Poor communication between the management and the employee can lead to demotivation and affect overall productivity. Employees become unwilling to work with the managers who are poor communicators. So, poor communication can lead to many types of conflict and frustration to the employees. Loss of working hours as instruction provided and messages sent are beyond the grasp of the recipient or the employees. Always be on time in work because time is always affect to the employees and organization. Poor communication often leads to frustration among the employees in an organization. Be communicative to your employees and feel your presence and sincerity to them because this is the only way to motivate to their work. People may feel left out if communication is not open and effective. Employees may feel left behind if the manager will always feel them unimportant. Manager will treat their employees nicely and communication is important to them. Poor communication can lead to many types of conflicts, which kills the prospect of organizational growth and prosperity. Poor communication can affect to the organization and it will be their hindrance to grow in organization. Common business communication etiquettes. Email etiquette. Make sure to indicate the subject in the field of subject. Start the email with formal salutation. Use BCC when you mail to a group of people and respect the privacy of the other's IDs. Write concisely and focus on the main idea of the email. Give an keen eye to the sentence structure and the punctuations in your content. Respond to business email as soon as possible. So this shows the email etiquette procedure and to show us on how is the proper way of communication via email that contains formal salutations, respect the privacy, concise and focus of the idea when mailing, proper sentence structure and punctuation, and lastly, respond to the email as soon as possible. Face-to-face communication. Maintain a standard level of professionalism. Address the person with his proper name once introduction is over. Remember the name and do not ask for it repeatedly. Avoid being emotional. Do not be garrulous and always limit the conversation to professional topics. Be an honest and sincere listener to the one speaking with you. Do not gesture wildly when you talk or laugh. Maintain a pleasant body language. Do not be personal during the conversation. It is all about your professionalism and attitude in our workplace. You also have to do is addressing people and be sincere listeners when someone speaks to you. And this is the reminders to communicating to the office. 11. Poor listening habits. Effective listeners do their best to avoid these habits. Calling the subject uninteresting, criticizing the speaker or delivery, getting overstimulated, listening only for facts, not taking notes or outlining everything, faking attention, tolerating or creating distractions, tuning out difficult material, letting emotional words block the message, wasting the time difference between speed of speech and of thought. Avoid these habits to your workplace because it will affect to your personality and attitudes. By doing these habits will be have impacts to you as a professional person. In this page, communication is very important in office. It can cause a lot of barriers and the good thing is there is a procedure on how to handle or prevent to those necessary barriers.